Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. I'm very thankful to all of you who are loving our shows, and my endeavor will be, and our team's endeavor will be to give quality content every time. Sat means truth, logos means a study or science, Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Mythology, on the other hand, is the opposite of Sattology. Myth means a fake lie imagination. Mythology means a science of fake lie imagination, study of fake lie imagination. Today, we are talking about policy paralysis through analysis. It's a global phenomena. It is happening in the USA. I'm sorry to all the Americans. We all know what is happening right now. And also in other countries, including India, where the policy paralysis is being, the world dynamics are changing and everything else is changing. So it is happening also. So I have a very special guest and friend who has been on a show and is one of the hit personalities on our show in terms of popularity. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Abhijit Iyer Mitra.
Veil, Vetrivel, and thanks for having me on as usual.
It's a pleasure, Abhijit. Abhijit, the Sanatan Dharma, and I told you earlier also that you have more knowledge on Dharma than most of the people when they claim to have. And what is the significance that despite having a Sanatan Dharma culture, the policy paralysis we are seeing in India also?
Sorry, you broke up.
Okay. I'm asking the question that why, despite having the Sanatan Dharma background and rich Itihas background, we are seeing policy paralysis right after independence also in India?
Look, it's not just been right after independence. It's been since about 780 or so. You look at it, it's this sort of mixing and matching of all kinds of justifications to justify being lethargic and do nothing. Right. At least in the early stages, you could say there is such a thing as too much scholarship, because people who tend to be extremely well educated uh, tend to have a lot of self doubt. Right. So, for example, when I read what I wrote 1 year back, I'm like, oh my God, what idiot wrote this? And I don't even want to. That's why I never read what I write. Right. Because knowledge is evolving. The problem is you let it paralyze you. This is one side. And you can say this happened a lot in early India. But later on, what's been happening is that you have a whole load of justifications thrown, uh, essentially for your inability to do things. So you interpret excuses, you make a virtue out of necessity. Essentially, that's what happens. Let me give you a contrary example, right? Let's take two fascist states, Portugal under Salazar and Spain under Franco. Franco was hardly literate. I mean, he was kind of semi educated. Salazar, on the other hand, was professor of economics at the University of Coimbra. Now, under normal circumstances, you would think that Portugal should have gone far, far ahead because it had an economics professor. No. Salazar essentially rotted Portugal. It was the end of Portugal under Salazar. On the other hand, Franco, who had very little knowledge, uh, the Spanish economy went from being one of the poorest in Europe to the 10th biggest economy in the world. Right? So the problem here has always been a lack of action and a sort of this sort of passive resistance, passive everything, passive aggressive everything. That's more of, it has nothing to do with dharma. It has more to do with the fact that a country like India sees passive non performance as an admirable trait.
The same disease has started affecting America also. Americans were known to have a good policy framework, but in the last, we have seen, from the Clinton administration, we have seen continuously the policy framework has weakened amongst various American think tanks. The view is very myopic to a large extent. So, what is their problem that why they are having policy paralysis?
I don't think America is seeing policy paralysis per se. Huh? I think America is seeing a whole load of bad policies. Quite the contrary. There's a whole load of policies being enacted there. It's just that they're all really rotten policies. I think a lot of what we're seeing in America has to do, of course, with ultra partisanship. That is fine. But the more and more you start going into division instead of unification. So, things like critical race theory and all of that, which is essentially, for me, there's no difference between what critical race theorists say today and what the flag holders of apartheid, Verwoerd and Botha, used to say in the 60s and 70s in South Africa. I mean, there's literally no difference. It's just that one person saying it was white, the other person saying it is black. Right? So it's quite the opposite in America. There is no policy paralysis. It's just a whole load of bad policy and a policy capture by what is essentially a uniparty that wants only its agenda. Like you look at the so-called mainstream right and mainstream left. What's the difference between them? None. All the mainstream so-called left supported the Iraq war based on extraordinary flimsy evidence. They all supported the horrific sanctions on Iraq that killed off 250,000 children. So what is all this, mainstream business? It's just bad policy, bad, plain and simple. America is very decisive when it wants to be. It's just decisive in the worst possible way. Churchill used to say this: when America has exhausted all options, we can ultimately trust it to make take good decisions. The issue is that time frame for America to understand bad decisions has gone completely. It's bad decision after bad decision after bad decision without understanding what the bad decision actually was. Because you have an ecosystem that essentially whitewashes all bad decisions.
So in India, like the post-independence, we have seen a very successful Narasimha Rao government, very successful on economic terms. And we have seen the second leader which has emerged with the confidence of the people is Modi. And so Modi versus Narasimha policies, do you think anything has changed between the two, or something is done more by the Modi government?
It's unfair to compare Modi to Narasimha Rao. Remember, Narasimha Rao achieved 10, 15 times what Modi achieved with a minority government. Modi has had two absolute majorities and he's achieved not even one fraction of what Narasimha Rao achieved. Today, they're discussing giving back statehood to Jammu and Kashmir. So you're essentially undoing what you did in terms of Article 370. You had GST, which has turned into full-blown extortion by the lower bureaucracy. You had demonetization, which did nothing because black money is still as prevalent today as it was then. We've taken a whole load of zingy decisions without any real impact, as opposed to Narasimha Rao, who took very, very zingy decisions, which had some of the most profound socio-economic impacts on India in the last 150 to 200 years.
Now, compared to the America, we have Carterism. Now, Bidenisms are now, isms I'm using this specifically for people those who understand. Bidenism versus Carterism. People are thinking it's Carterism is happening again in Biden administration. Do you agree with that?
I don't agree with that. I think if you go back and look at history, Carter was a spectacularly incompetent president. All right. In fact, Carter kind of faced the kind of blowback without achieving anything that Trump did. Okay, Carter pissed off everybody. Nobody liked Carter, and Carter achieved nothing. Trump achieved a lot, but he pissed off as many people as Carter did, I guess. You didn't see the systemic opposition that you did to any president since Jimmy Carter with Trump. With Biden, it's just back to it's Obama 3, technically, if you look at it. It's either Obama 3 or Hillary Clinton 0.05. I mean, it's essentially nobody has agency here. It's the party elites and the party power brokers controlling everything.
So in the when we see the governments, like you mentioned, Trump as well, very tough decisions, law, and maybe too much talk also to some extent, but we saw the Americans rising to support him in a big way. But in the case of, if you look at going back to the history, similar times were done for the, if you look at the American history, then Woodrow Wilson was one of those presidents there which had a significant impact like that. In the case of India, we have we have not seen India like rising to the potential where the world, when they expect them to take tough decisions, is not there. So, what is the, according to you, is analysis on that? Why do you think that has happened?
What is happening specifically?
Like
That
a lack of decision making at the top.
right now, it's too much micromanagement out of the prime minister's office. The prime minister is afraid of his own shadow, so he trusts only bureaucrats who haven't had a single day's education since their bachelor's degree. And they've taken the exam, the entrance exam, and they think that's the end of their education. So if you trust a highly specialized economy to somebody like that, well, it's clearly not. You're really not suited. Maybe you're suited to run a medieval fiefdom. You're not suited to run a modern country. Definitely not. But just to push back on Woodrow Wilson, there's a huge school of thought that I subscribe to, that Woodrow Wilson was probably one of the most calamitous American presidents. Uh, uh, I think there's a lot of this isolationism and withdrawal from the League of Nations and things like that. Not withdrawal, refusing to join the League of Nations and things like that. And by this time, let's face it, America was the paramount power. Europe didn't want to accept that America was the paramount power, but America was the paramount power. It never helped. So, no, Woodrow Wilson was actually a pretty terrible president.
Now, coming back to the China policy, China on the east of India, it seems that Andaman Nicobar Islands in India, they're least protected now, and there is a 9-degree channel, 10-degree channel. There are a lot of sea lanes pass right through the Indian economic sea zone, and it is not yet well protected to protect the India's interests. What is your view on the Andaman Nicobar
Look, it's
security?
decently protected. I wouldn't agree with that. I'd say it's quite decently protected, as much as you can with India's current dysfunctional military. So let's leave the dysfunctional military aside. For being guarded by a dysfunctional military, it's fairly well guarded by a dysfunctional military. The issue is you've posted an army chap to command Andaman, which has no army action. It's entirely about air power and sea power. So, it's a lot like the Spanish Armada. The guy who was given charge of the Spanish Armada had never fought a sea battle before. So you're essentially repeating the same mistake as Spain and King Philip did in, what was it, 1500 and something or 1600 and something, I forget now.
There's official reports, and you also said no in the last discussion also, that there are official reports of 40 submarines, Chinese submarines, loitering in the Indian economic zone.
You don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the capacity to do 40 submarines. They can't mobilize that. Most of their submarines are diesel electric, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They can't come this far out. So even their localized power, we keep doing satellite analysis of local bases in Hambantota, in Gwadar, and things like that. There's at no point of time is there 40 submarines in the Indian Ocean. Chinese, no.
So one last
3,
point.
4 at most.
One last point. I know you have to go for another meeting today, but I'll ask the last point. Between ATAGS and Thor, which is the Athos, the Israeli guns, Indian Army, the reports are coming, the Indian Army is going to select Israeli 400 guns. But do you think that is a relevant decision for the Atmanirbhar?
No. And I'll tell you why. You selected an American light howitzer, then you select a Korean tracked howitzer, mobile, and now you select another gun. Tell me, in what part of the industrial world, in any kind of industry or business, does it make sense that for one caliber, you choose three different kinds of guns. How do you create economies of scale? You know, the M777, the American howitzer that we bought, the light howitzer, its line was shutting down. We should have just bought the entire howitzer and its technology and then developed a self-propelled base out of it, a tracked and a wheeled self-propelled base out of it. No, this is exactly the kind of corruption masquerading around as incompetence. Because, in India, crimes of commission are punished, but errors of omission are not. So when you're corrupt, you mask it as incompetence. And that is what we're seeing. It's chronic incompetence. This is what I was telling you about the dysfunctional Indian military.
You're absolutely right. Any country of the size of India cannot depend on a multitude of defense technologies, which can we're primarily doing the same work. The another point which comes to the mind is the use of non-use of the recently they have deregulated the Ordnance Factory Board, and according to publicly available figures, OFBs are the second largest military industrial base, but they have not produced anything, including rifles, till date. So, do you think this
They won't,
restructuring is going to have change that?
doing the same scam that was done during the UPA of demerging Indian Airlines and Air India. Do you remember that? It created a whole second bureaucracy, more paperwork, more officers and everything, so more jobs for the boys. Now they're saying they're going to break it up to make it more competitive. How? The whole world is moving towards conglomeration and you're moving towards splitting things up. How does this even work? Tell me, in what business sense does it work? This is just another scheme for people to make money, right? Let's be clear about it. It's just corruption through and through.
Yeah. So, do you think that any private companies are guiding these decisions, or do you think it's
No,
again
because
that
the
policy?
Indian private sector is completely treated like a stepchild. Right. So even, I don't buy this thing that this is a scheme by Western arms lobbyists to keep India weak or whatever. They're not thinking that far ahead. The thing is, this is a scheme by Indian bureaucrats to line their own pockets. And it's either that or they're genuinely stupid. Of course, both are believable because there is nothing more stupid than an Indian bureaucrat. There is also genuinely nothing more corrupt than an Indian bureaucrat. So, sometimes when I want to have somebody arrested for corruption, I genuinely think Hanlon's razor saying never attribute to malice what you can to stupidity.
You're right in that assessment, because the most of the Western countries, publicly or privately, they want India to be self-reliant and become a custodian of peace in that region. So they won't try to
Exactly.
deliberate.
Every single person I know in Australia, in America, is like, from Australia to America, is like, why are you guys making these mistakes? We want you to be strong, self-reliant, because our industrial model isn't about protecting weaklings. It's finding strong people, making them stronger, because we all prosper. Isn't it amusing that the West seems to understand Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahanau Bhunattu, Sahaviryam Karavavahi, Tejasvinavati Tamastuma Vidvishavahai better than people who recite it every day who don't know head or tail of what it means. We were made to recite it in school, and I didn't know what it meant till I actually read a translation. And that is what America believes. That is what the entire American alliance system is based on. Very, very powerful allies. And it comes with clear markers. If there is this kind of political trust, then there will be this transfer of technology. If there isn't, then the technology transfer level will be here, etc., etc., etc. How much clearer can you get? So stop blaming other people for your faults. For a religion that believes in introspection and not looking at externalities, but looking within and making yourself strong, I have never come across, India is what wokeism is if it were anthropomorphically mutated into a country. Wokes are what India is as a country. Never take responsibility for your actions, blame everybody else under the sun.
You're absolutely
Overgrown child that hasn't yet hit, you've hit 20, 25, forget 20, 25. You've hit 50, 60 when you should have achieved male menopause, but you still haven't achieved puberty.
true. I mean, when you start blaming the West is saying, "What are you doing about it?" If you don't do anything about it, then we'll do something about it because they have to ensure
And
their
tell
security.
me something. How did all these countries, Germany was devastated, Japan was devastated, Korea was devastated, China was devastated. And yet it is based on American money that all these countries have, China has become a threat to America, living off American money, thriving off American markets. So, when Indians tell me, oh, this is because of the foreign arms lobby, I'm sitting there thinking, are you an idiot? Or who is the idiot that made you a general or a secretary to government?
See, most of the Indian bureaucracy is carrying the old Cold War thoughts that America is a
No,
Russian.
no, they don't even carry old Cold War thoughts. They carry no thoughts. If you open up the cranium of an Indian bureaucrat, it is considered the eighth wonder of the world. That is where proof exists of a black hole. It sucks in everything. The cranium is the event horizon after which it sucks in everything and nothing can ever come out.
See, yesterday I was with the governor here, and one thing he said it. He told me he wants to partner with a leading Indian state to make
Tell
sure.
him not to. Tell him not to. Tell him to save his own money and save his own business people and not to. They will lose money. They will be screwed over by the government. They'll be screwed over by everybody. They will do nothing. They will only, it's a bottomless pit. Tell him not to. Tell him to save his shareholders and stockholders money. Never make that mistake.
So one of the
Never
things,
come within a 500-kilometer radius of India if you are genuine and you genuinely want to invest and do good.
there is a culture of partnership. Every year it changes, and the Philippines has been a partner 1 year, and one of the Indian states, which I do not know which one, but I'll talk to you and other people and discuss it. So one thing which America is known for is that when they come to after they sign the deal, they never go back on the deal. After they sign the deal, they honor the deal, but they want the other
As
party
opposed
to.
to India, where we sign deals which we never intend to live up to. And when we don't live up to it, we screw you over in our courts. We take you all the way to international arbitration. And when international arbitration also goes against India, we say, screw you. We're a sovereign country. We don't have to listen to international arbitration. And that is if you're lucky, because even in the courts, you'll be bogged down for 20, 30 years. By which time your company would have mutated and become some other company or collapsed or whatever. Do everybody a favor. Do not put your money in India.
So one of the things in the Afghanistan era, in Afghanistan, now the changing dynamics there, India was chosen as a preferred partner there because it has done the most humanitarian work in Afghanistan over Pakistan. And Indian bases were also requested, and everything was requested, which we do not know. We know now it is not happening. So do you think what is the rationale behind that in India?
So India never wanted to supply, India still does not want to supply military equipment to Afghanistan. India has never asked for military bases in Afghanistan. Far from it, the Afghans have been saying, give us weapons, take a base here. We keep saying no. Why? Because we are concerned about what Pakistan thinks. But there is some logic to it, which is you can't defeat geography. If we supply Afghanistan, how are we going to do it? Because Iran hasn't let us operationalize Chabahar. They've given us the runaround for the last 20 years and they've screwed us over right royally on Chabahar. And Pakistan certainly won't let us transport it through. Russia doesn't want Afghanistan getting a third party supplier like India. So how are we going to supply it? Unless, you have Star Trek style dematerialize and materialize again, Scotty beam me up kind of sci-fi stuff, it's not happening. So there's a hard reality check to it. Plus, of course, there's the classic thing of the Indian government, which is we never support our friends. India is known to backstab its friends.
There are options for India.
Be an Indian. When you are in trouble, how do you figure out who is an Indian? You hold a mirror, the fellow standing behind you with the knife ready, that is the Indian.
But there are options from Kazakhstan down to Afghanistan. Do you think that option is there? There's already a military base there of Indian.
Look, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all of them, again, how are you going to supply them? See, you have to fly over China or you have to fly over Pakistan, number one. Number two, all of those are in the extended Russian sphere of influence. They will not do anything unless Russia gives you the go ahead to. The last thing Russia wants is for India to gain some kind of independent foothold or leverage in Afghanistan. And then Russia's negotiator on Afghanistan, Zamir Kabulov, is a completely compromised man. He's an ISI stooge. And I'm not saying this. People in Moscow, in the Kremlin, have told me that he's an ISI stooge. And there's a huge amount of anger in the Kremlin about him because nobody has done more to help the Taliban than Zamir Kabulov has. So when the Russian-Afghan policy itself is compromised by an ISI, by a Pakistani intelligence stooge, tell me, what chance do you have?
The Twitter fiasco in India, now we know there's a negotiation happening, back channel negotiation happening, which do you think it is ever going to happen that senior Indian government officials will also leave Twitter any time for whatever is going on in India?
Do nothing to Twitter. Please understand this. India's is a weak, feckless government. Like you said, policy paralysis. Even what actions they have taken today were forced on the Indian government by the Supreme Court of India. Remember, they never wanted to enact a law. They enacted guidelines and the Supreme Court threw it back in their face and said, implement this as rules, not as guidelines. Then they had to implement it as rules. Right? So this is a government that won't do anything. Whatever it does is for publicity at best and nothing more. So let's not have any hopes of the Indian government. Twitter will get away with what Twitter gets away with.
Yeah, I think the Twitter has crossed a red line even in the USA. And I believe...
I doubt that very much. Between big tech, remember, Twitter is a small company, but big tech has enough money. What Twitter is doing is they are using the power of the other big tech companies to cross red lines. And the other companies are very happy with that because on one hand, they are not taking the risk, but they reap the rewards. Because the further and further Twitter goes, the more and more precedent is set and those big tech companies can follow in Twitter's lead. So in that sense, Twitter is being used as the vanguard, the pivot core of any attack. The armored column that goes in first to break a line through the enemy kind of thing, the initial, the archers, the mounted archers that used to go and weaken up the enemy. That is how Twitter is being used out there. So nothing is going to happen to Twitter in America in spite of Justice Clarence Thomas's judgment. And mind you, despite Justice Clarence Thomas's judgment, what's happened with Trump's Twitter account? Facebook says, Facebook calls their thing a Supreme Court, the Facebook Supreme Court. Right? So in India, forget about it. This is a government that reeks of inferiority complexes. It is a government of brown monkeys desperate for white approval. They're literally, all those racist stereotypes of brown people sitting on the window waiting for the white man to throw whatever it is, ice cream or bananas or whatever at them and picking it up off the roads. Like, in James Bond and Octopussy, when Roger Moore is running in the rickshaw and he says, "Rupiah," and he throws all this money out and all the natives come and collect it. That is your government right now.
True. I think many faces we are seeing this policy paralysis. The last policy, the last question on this is: has Indian foreign policy changed with the Myanmar and Israel abstentions in the UN?
No, zero change. We follow the same policy that we did since Narasimha Rao's time, which is on Myanmar, and that's a good policy actually. Which is, Myanmar is our neighbor. America, France, Germany, Britain, they all have the luxury of antagonizing Myanmar because Myanmar is not on their borders. Myanmar is on our borders. So we have to ensure keep the Chinese out. So we can't allow Myanmar to get terribly isolated, irrespective of what they do. Number one. Number two is Israel. With Israel, it's the same over and over and over again, which is that, we keep voting against Israel at the UN Security Council on all non-relevant resolutions. There is a difference between just resolutions and operative resolutions. And operative resolutions are things that have tangible consequences for the Israelis. So our deal with the Israelis is on all the operative resolutions, we'll vote against them. We'll vote with Israel. On all the on all the irrelevant, we condemn Israel. What does a condemnation of Israel actually mean? For that, we'll vote against Israel.
True, we have seen that. So, do you think the military junta in Myanmar, which many Americans are analyzing it, also are they Chinese or they're independent of Chinese connection?
Nothing. They are pro-Burma. I think people who say it's pro-India or pro-China are basically stupid people who don't understand. Burma has played China like no other country has. Burma has screwed China over and over again since 1948. People don't realize this, but the Burmese handling of China has been the most sophisticated in the world.
That's true.
They are essentially pro-Burmese. Right. So it doesn't matter. The abrogation of democracy right now has a lot to do with the West support for the Rohingya and them pillorying and going after Aung San Suu Kyi. Because the moment they did that, the military junta there decided, well, this woman has no value left for us if she's not going to whitewash us. And she wasn't technically whitewashing. I can tell you, having studied the Rohingya situation very carefully, the Rohingyas were engaged in an absolutely murderous terror campaign whose entire aim was to bring Burmese retribution down on the population. Of course, the Burmese walked into that trap, but then remember, any third world military, precision targeting of just soldiers is a luxury of the first world. Third world militaries can't do that. Right, they do 1940 style strategic air bombing, what General Curtis LeMay was doing to Germany. Okay, the firebombing of Dresden and the firebombing of Tokyo and all of that. Incidentally, the firebombing of Tokyo and the firebombing of Dresden cost more lives than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, it's classic World War II tactics because that is the level of technology that they're at. And these guys, the Rohingyas, they knew exactly what they were doing. So please spare me the nonsense.
True. And the last but not the least, one of the things which comes to my mind is India hasn't provided Burma with any significant military technology till date. Is that right?
Burma doesn't want to buy Indian crap. Even the Burmese have standards, Adi, believe it or not.
Thank you so much in this bitter truth session. And I think that's what you love Abhijit for. And we'll come back again next week with some very exciting content. Do let us know your feedback and let us know how we can put additional topics. I asked all the questions which I had from the audience. Okay. So thank you so much, Abhijit. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.